So that's the recording started. Right, for those who don't know me, my name's Mike Buckley. I'm the Green Streets Development Manager for the White Rose Forest. It means I lead our efforts to try to establish urban trees and woodlands as an integral sort of part of the built environment in North and West Yorkshire. But more importantly, we're here today to hear about the research work of Ellie Smith at the University of Leeds. Ellie's been researching the modelling of the 330-300 principle in a number of English cities, 4 of which are in the White Rose Forest, which is excellent for us. Can I just ask that everybody just please mutes and turns off their cameras, especially while Ellie's making the presentation, and we don't get any background noise. That's great, thank you. In terms of the running order, I'm going to do a very short intro to the White Rose Forest. I appreciate there'll be some people on the call who aren't familiar with the White Rose Forest. And then we're going to do just a very quick poll that might be really helpful in terms of knowing what people's background is, what familiarity they've got with 330-300. Then we'll roll into Ellie's presentation, and we should have time for a bit of discussion and Q&A after that before we close. So I'll just share my screen. Excuse me, too many things open. Right. Yeah, we skip that now. Yeah, White Rose Forest. White Rose Forest, it's one of England's 15 community forests. Importantly, it's a partnership with the local and combined authorities and national parks in North and West Yorkshire. The partnership are all signatories to the new strategic plan, which at the really high level sets out our shared vision, our targets, behaviours to deliver the White Rose Forest over the next 25 years. There's also a new action plan which has just been finalised, and that sets out in more details the priorities for the partnership over the next 5 years. One activity which is to complete the Green Streets development plan, which is a task I lead on. And that will set out the sort of mechanisms to achieve that wider buy-in to the benefits of urban trees and woodlands that we very much aspire to. There's 3 programmes within the strategic plan. Apart from Green Streets, which is the urban bit, but talk really about nature-based solutions. Landscape for Water is the one where we're delivering the most tree planting. It's been a remarkably successful tree planting programme over the last 6-7 years, principally supported through Trees for Climate funding from DEFRA. Focus is very much on nature recovery and helping to provide the sort of natural flood management benefits in the upper catchment, so reducing downstream flood peaks. And as 3 million trees planted, it's been probably the single most effective new planting mechanism throughout England. But you might well ask, why do we need trees and woodlands in our towns and cities? Well, hopefully I actually don't need to tell you the answer to that. Hopefully we're all advocates ourselves, but just in case, the answers are in the box here anyway. And I suppose the point today is that we're not actually talking about justifying trees and woodlands in towns and cities. I think we accept that should be a given. It's more about how we work through the process of prioritising spatial decisions for our urban woodland resource going forward. And it was worth, I thought, mentioning just how we do that with Green Streets. So Green Streets takes probably quite a familiar approach. it uses a number of spatial data sets to create a priority layer, and it's based on the key route network in North and West Yorkshire, so prioritizes transport, the sort of key transport corridors, looks at the areas of multiple deprivation, so the lowest 20% of LSOAs are included within the green streets layer, looks at where the heat island impacts within our towns and cities are greatest, looks at air quality management areas because of the option of pollution interception by trees, and also at areas for investment, which are areas that we would like to see more trees and woodlands within. And I guess this is a familiar sort of approach to many, and effectively it's designed to direct what are finite resources. What 3300 offers, though, is a more nuanced approach, I would say. It's a principle that can be modelled at any scale, from sort of individual trees to groups to across urban areas. And it also manages to combine sort of well-being, placemaking, climate adaptation, and nature recovery into a single concept. It was developed by Dr. Cecil Konijnendijk, who's the co-director of the Nature-Based Solutions Institute. And the approach is gaining increasing international prominence. So to have this research applied to the White Rose Forest and indeed other English cities, it's a fantastic opportunity. The link there is something that obviously you can follow up in due course, but it's a really interesting study, recent study, which has compared 300 across a whole raft of European cities. And it really sort of, I guess, highlights the traction that the approach is gaining now. And so, as I say again, to have this done at a local level by the work that Ellie's done is a tremendous opportunity for us. So if I just stop sharing, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to launch a poll for you all to fill in. Just give everybody a couple of minutes just to answer the questions. It shouldn't take you terribly long. Right, now, what I'll say, can everybody see that poll? There should be 4 questions. Just flick through the questions. Anybody get any problems? Right, well, just carry on. Yeah, just give you a couple of minutes just to complete those. Can I just check that someone just shout out if there's any problems there? Just there's no results coming through at the moment.
Yeah, sorry. I've got one question. I
Yeah.
assume Yorkshire's North East England.
Yes, yes. Sorry, I didn't know how long to make that list, but Yorkshire is classified as North East England. Yes. I'm assuming everybody's able to do this. Okay. Yeah, I'll don't seem yet to be able to see the results, but I'll work on being able to try and pick those up as we go through Ellie's presentation. Oh. Lindsay, I'm sorry, it came up under, I'll check in the chat what you said, that came up under the links and slides in the chat. Thank you. Yes, Lindsay, yeah, we'll get that sorted out during the meeting, or at least at the end after we've got a little bit more time at the end to make sure that everybody can see the slides. But as I say, we are recording anyway, so they'll be available that way. Okay. I shall review that poll as I say, as Ellie's doing her presentation, but I think we'll leave that now. Go back to polls. Close that. Okay. What I'll do now is I'll move on to Ellie's presentation, the main event, and Ellie, I think if you want to just try and share your screen.
Yeah.
Lovely, thank you.
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. And as I say, if there's any questions while Ellie's talking, please just put them in the chat. I'll try and pick those up as we go along, and we can ask them at the end, or I'll be very happy for folk if they want to just raise their hands at the end to ask questions themselves. That would be even more helpful. But over to you, Ellie. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Hi everyone, it's really great to be here and to show you what I've been working on. As Mike said, I'm Ellie. I'm a final year PhD student at the University of Leeds, and my PhD is also in collaboration with other organisations, including Forest Research and the National Library of Scotland. So I'm going to cover two different topics today. Firstly, I'll show you my recent work, which has analysed access to trees and green spaces in present-day English cities, including Leeds, Bradford, Wakefield and York, using the 330-300 rule. And I have presented on that before, so if you've seen that part of the presentation, apologies in advance. Secondly, I'll then share what I'm currently working on, which is optimising tree planting for canopy cover targets and 330-300 success in the White Rose Forest. So starting with analysing the 330-300 rule in English cities, for anyone who hasn't heard of the rule or can't remember what each of the components mean, I'll just quickly go over that. So the 3 suggests that every house, school and workplace should have a view of 3 trees. 30 indicates that each neighbourhood should have at least 30% canopy cover, and 300 indicates that every building should be within 300 metres of a 1 hectare public green space. And so I've analysed the performance at these rules for buildings in 7 English cities. So firstly, just to say, I had to use a number of different data sets to do this analysis, and I'll just go over them here. So for trees, we've used tree data from Blue Sky's National Tree Map. Buildings and green spaces have come from Ordnance Survey. And for neighbourhoods, we've classified neighbourhoods as lower layer super output areas from the Office for National Statistics. So these are areas where the population is between 1,000 and 3,000 people. And in this analysis, we only considered urban LSOAs. So this figure shows the regions that we looked at, located on a map of England, and we looked at the local authority areas of 7 different cities, shown around the edges. So here the green shows the full local authority, and the orange shows the LSOAs that we studied. As I said, we only examined urban LSOAs, and in some cases there were further limitations on which ones we could look at, introduced by the tree data availability. So I'm just going to go through the methodology of how I've analysed this for every building in these cities for each of the different components. So for the 300 metre from greenspace test, we did a network analysis to identify walking routes between buildings and green spaces. And I did this using the Python package OSM-NX. And so to do this analysis, you have to identify nodes on the pre-existing network to calculate a walking route between. And sometimes these nodes can be slightly removed from the real point that you want to look at. So for buildings, we were using the nearest node to the centroid of the building. And for green spaces, we did this from each green space access point. So those are the places you're actually able to enter the park or green space if there are gates or fences or similar. And so in this example on the screen, the route goes from the green space access point at the top, which is the white circle, to the building node of the building with the cross at the bottom. And then if the walking route, such as the one in the figure, is less than or equal to 300 meters, then the green space test will be passed for this building. In this case, in the figure, this walking route was actually 459 meters, so this building wouldn't pass. And then for the three tree test, whether you can see 3 trees from a building, we used lines of sight from windows, which we simulated around buildings at 5 meter intervals to tree points. And so the maximum distance for the lines used in the results I'm going to share was 50 meters. And a building would have to have a line of sight to 3 different trees from any of its windows to pass the test in this case. And then the canopy cover was calculated for each LSOA just by summing the crown area of each tree that was within that LSOA. So now to go through some results. These are the results for each of those 7 cities, showing the proportion of buildings meeting the 3-tree rule. And also on this plot, the grey shading shows the range of results from other studies that have analysed 330-300 performance in cities around the globe. And the black line shows the average results from these other studies. So what you can see here and what we found is that the English cities perform about as well as cities in other studies for the 3-tree rule, with results for the English cities near to the average of other studies, although they are all below the average. And the lowest result we see here is Plymouth, which is in yellow, which has around 52% of buildings meeting the 3-tree rule. And then both Manchester and Leeds, which are in orange and green, are the highest performers and have around 66% of buildings meeting the rule. And then the same kind of plot for the 30% canopy cover component. You can see here that the English cities do perform worse at this compared to the 3-tree rule if we're comparing to the average of those other studies, with the results for the English cities coming in quite a bit lower than the average of those other studies. So here York has 0% of buildings meeting this rule, which means that in the neighbourhoods that we analysed, none of them had 30% canopy cover. And then Plymouth, again in yellow, has the highest proportion of buildings meeting this rule at around 13%. And then the same results for the 300 metre from green space rule. Again, all the results in this work are below the mean results of locations in other studies, but we do see a bit more of a range here. So Stoke-on-Trent in blue is the highest performer and has around 50% of buildings within 300 metres of green space, while York in red is actually outside the range of other studies and has about 20% of buildings meeting this rule. And then in this plot, this looks at the proportion of buildings meeting all 3 components of the 330-300 rule. And in our study, we found Manchester performed the best with about 2.1% of buildings analysed meeting all 3 components. However, obviously 2.1% of buildings is still extremely low. And so what these statistics highlight is the consistently low access levels to trees and green spaces across the English cities in this study. And then on this slide, I'm just showing the results in a slightly different way. So we've got a Venn diagram which shows the results for all 7 English cities combined. And it shows the proportion of buildings meeting each component and the overlap of success with the other components. And the reason to show this is to highlight that only 6.2% of buildings met the 30% canopy cover rule, which is much lower than the totals for the other two components. And what this tells us is that it is the 30% canopy component that's the main driver of this generally poor performance at the 330-300 rule. And I'm now showing the same type of Venn diagram, but for the four White Rose Forest local authorities that were investigated. And we see the same pattern across all four regions. The 30% canopy rule is the main obstacle to success. However, as we saw in the bar chart earlier, the performance does vary slightly between cities. For example, none of the buildings in York met all three components, which is indicated by the number in the centre of the diagram, while almost 2 in every 100 buildings met all three components in Leeds. York shows the lowest performance overall and Leeds shows the highest. However, they both perform similarly at the 3-tree component, with around 66% of buildings achieving this target in Leeds and around 62% in York. And Wakefield actually shows the best performance at the 300-metre component out of these four locations, with around 30% of buildings within 300 metres of a public green space. And these Venn diagrams were actually created as part of a blog post for the White Rose Forest website. So if you would like to read the whole thing or share these results with colleagues, I've included the link on the slide, which will be shared, and the link can also be put in the chat later, like we said. So as another part of the analysis, we also used a grading system to identify an overall score for each building based on how well it performs at each component of the rule. So the scores go from 0 to 3 for different levels of performance at each component. And this gives an overall score from 0 to 9, with 0 being the worst and 9 being the best performance you can have. So using this kind of grading helps to identify which areas are closer to meeting the rule and those that are furthest away, and therefore shows the priority areas for improvement. And you just get a bit more information than a simple pass or fail of the test. So here I'm showing the spatial variation in the 330-300 results for York, and the colours show the overall grading in 1 hectare cells. So the score per cell is the average grading across buildings in that cell. So the colours are showing the grading, and the darker green is showing better performance, and the lighter green and yellow is showing the worst performance. And then what you can see in this plot, and is similar to what we saw in the plots for other cities, is that the yellow areas, which are the areas that are performing the worst, often coincide with the urban centres. And this is maybe what we expect in these areas. They're more built up, and so there's less space for trees and green spaces. But what it really highlights is that these are the areas that need the most intervention. So as part of this work, I also looked at how the land use of where trees are situated impacts success at the 330-300 rule on an LSOA scale. So that's on a neighbourhood scale. So to do this, I identified the land use of each tree and also calculated the amount of each land use type in each neighbourhood. And the land use types that were used were private garden, public green space, private green space, other green space, woodland, and road/street. And I then used this land use data to assess, again on a neighbourhood scale, the impact of land use on the 3-tree and 30% canopy cover components of the 330-300 rule, as well as on the overall grading, so that score from 0 to 9. And so to look at the results from that land use analysis, for the proportion of buildings meeting the 3-tree rule, what we found was that the most important land use variable for success at this was the density of trees in private gardens. So basically, the more trees in private gardens, the better for the 3-tree score. The canopy cover, we found that the proportion of land in the LSOA that's woodland was most important. And you can see this clear relationship on the figure. So we have an increase in woodland cover in a neighbourhood on the x-axis and increase in canopy cover on the y-axis. And then finally, for the overall grading, we found that the proportion of land in the LSOA that's woodland was most important, followed by the density of trees in private gardens. And as that grading is based on the canopy cover and the 3-tree rule, this follows on from those results for those components quite nicely. But what this does suggest overall is that more trees in private gardens and perhaps stricter controls on their removal, as well as more areas of woodland, are the most efficient ways to improve and maintain 330-300 results in UK neighbourhoods. So that was the end of the first topic, and now on to the second part of the talk, where I'll introduce the work I'm currently doing, which is optimising tree planting for 330-300 success and canopy cover targets in the White Rose Forest. So what we've just seen from the previous work is that meeting the 330-300 rule is obviously quite challenging, and many areas are setting their own canopy cover targets instead, based on what's feasible for them. So the White Rose Forest has aligned its 2050 goals with England's 2025 Environmental Improvement Plan. And the White Rose Forest 2050 strategic plan that Mike was talking about sets canopy cover targets for each local authority to achieve tree canopy and woodland cover across the whole White Rose Forest geography of at least 16.5% of total land area. And so 4 of these local authorities were in the 330-300 study that I've just shown. And this slide shows these 4 local authorities and their canopy cover targets for 2050. So we have Leeds with a target of 33% canopy cover by 2050, Bradford with 17%, Wakefield with 18.1%, and York with 13%. And in fact, if the individual targets of each of the local authorities in the White Rose Forest are met, it would lead to an 18.5% canopy cover across the White Rose Forest region, rather than the 16.5% target set by the Environmental Improvement Plan. So the aim of this work is to create tree planting maps for these 4 cities, showing the optimal places to plant trees to firstly improve performance at the 330-300 framework, and secondly to meet canopy cover targets. And so to do this, I'm using a model that simulates new trees and identifies the best locations to plant them to meet these goals. So to give a bit of an overview of how I'm doing this, the first step for this model is to generate trees on a grid. So I've got an example grid in the image at the bottom of the slide. So the green circles are the trees. And yeah, they're generated across whichever region you're looking at. Then the next step is to remove trees in invalid locations. So for example, those on roads or on top of buildings or things like that. So you can see with the second image at the bottom of the slide, the reduction in trees that this results in, going from the grid to removing those trees in the invalid locations. And so within this model, there's an overall score, which is based on 330-300 performance, and different trees contribute differently to improving this score. So by applying penalties to the score when trees are placed in locations which don't help to improve canopy cover or the 3-tree component, the model is able to work out which trees are the best ones to plant to prevent these penalties being applied, and then get the highest score possible. So by doing this, we get the optimized tree locations, and you can see this in the right-hand image at the bottom of the slide. And in this case, I'm just looking at the tree planting we would need in the first 5 years of planting. So in this location that we're looking at, a lot of the trees were kept between identifying those valid locations and then finding the optimal locations in the last image. But this won't always be the case. And you can see that some of the trees from going from the second to the third image have been removed. So I mentioned that we remove the invalid trees and we also apply some other constraints. So the trees are simulated with a crown radius of 3.4 meters, and this is estimated from growth rates of UK urban trees and allometric equations linking diameter at breast height of a tree to crown area. And this is the crown radius we've estimated for a 30-year-old tree. So that's what we've used. New trees are spaced at 8-metre intervals, and new tree stems also have to be spaced from existing trees by at least 4 metres plus the crown radius of the existing tree. And then in terms of play areas, trees can only be placed within 5 metres of the edge of play spaces or playing fields, just to preserve these areas as playing areas. And in terms of infrastructure, there can't be any trees planted within 8 metres of buildings, 50 metres of wind turbines, 6 metres of overhead power or comm signs, and 5 metres of telecom masts or pylons. And this is based on the best guidance I could find, and I would say that it's not necessarily always used in practice. And then finally, for roads and verges, there's no planting on roads. Street trees need a 2-metre clearance of the stem from the footway edge, and trees on grass verges need 1.5-metre clearance from the grass edge. So with this model, we're planning to make tree planting maps for a few different scenarios. In the first scenario, we're going to compare results when tree planting is allowed on private land compared to when it's not. So that also includes private gardens. And I think this is quite interesting because in the previous work that I've just shown, private gardens came out as quite important for the 3-tree rule. And that was just based on the trees that were existing already. So it'll be interesting to see if that's the case here and whether new trees in private gardens really helps with the 3-tree rule or not. In the second scenario, we're going to compare favouring planting trees on streets, minimal street tree planting, or no bias either way. And as street trees can be expensive to plant, we hope that this analysis will highlight how beneficial they are in terms of 330-300 success. So we'll use the scenarios to investigate, firstly, the impact on the 330-300 rule and the success at that, as I said. Also, to investigate where are trees being placed for the most successful scenarios. So looking at the land use type of where they're planted might give general ideas about where it's helpful to plant trees, and we can see if it matches up with previous work, which shows how existing tree locations influence 330-300 success. And then finally, we also hope to investigate the temperature reduction that we might see from the new tree planting in each scenario. So just a look at what the output might look like. Here I'm showing an example of some optimization results for an area in York. In this case, there's no private land planting allowed for new trees and no bias towards or against planting trees on streets. So we have the different land use categories shown by the different colours. So for example, we've got private gardens in purple, public green space in light green, and private green space in the darker orange. And existing trees are shown as dark green circles, and then new trees are shown as brown circles. So these are harder to see, but you can see a few new trees on the side of the road near the bottom and also on the right of the figure. And here they're mostly on the other green space category, which in this little snippet is mostly grass verges. And so this is the kind of output I'm hoping to get for each local authority that I'm looking at. However, the outputs at the moment are just point locations, and just for this image, I've applied a buffer around that point so you can see the size of each tree. Then finally, in terms of the temperature reduction analysis we plan to do, we're hoping to identify new groups of trees that could be created from the suggested planting maps, such as the one circled in red on the picture. And then based on new research on the urban heat island and treescapes in Leeds, we plan to determine the cooling introduced by these trees compared to the land that was there before. So that might have been a grass area or a concrete area, and that will make a difference as to the cooling introduced by new trees. So that is everything that I wanted to share with you, and I now have some questions to ask you. So there are a few questions here, and it might take some time to come up with your answers. I would be really grateful if you don't have any answers now. If you think of something later, if you could email them to me. So my email address is on the last slide and can also be put into the chat. However, if you do have anything to share now, that would be great. But I'll just talk through them to give people time to think. So the questions that I want to ask are, What decisions do you currently make that would benefit from more precise guidance on where trees should be planted? Secondly, what constraints do you face that an optimization model would need to account for on top of the constraints that I've already talked about? Thirdly, if you receive tree planting priority maps, what formats or outputs would make them most usable for your work? And then finally, how would you see a 330-300 tree planting optimization map fitting into your existing work? So that's my presentation. Should I leave those on the screen, Mike?
Yes, Ellie, sorry, do that at the moment. I've just popped your email address in the chat.
Perfect.
There. I did send the questions round before the webinar, but I appreciate they are quite complex. Bit frustrated, and I'm just going to just bear with me. I'm just going to have a quick look at that poll to see if actually I can get the results. It was didn't seem to I didn't seem to be able to get the results, unfortunately.
Sorry, Mike, I can see the results in the chat.
Can you? Oh, right. Okay.
If you scroll to the top of the chat.
Now then. I can't seem to find. Well, it's possible that actually that's not the same poll. At what time was that, Ellie?
I just have it from underneath. You can say, sorry, you can see view poll, and it says there's 41 responses, and then I click on view poll, and I can see where people.
I can't see that. That is not bizarre. Unless it's probably hidden somewhere where I'm my illiteracy is not able to identify it. Can I? Well, if you can see Ellie, is there an impression that there are a number of people who have had experience of 330-300 themselves in the past?
So we have about 50% of people saying their knowledge of the 330-300 principle is limited.
Okay.
And then around 14% say it's very good.
Right. And the last question was about whether they've applied it in their work.
That's similar. So 15% of people, it is embedded in our work. 23% yes, but not more widely adopted. And 47% no, the principle would be new to us.
Okay. Well, in which case, I'm just with on the back of the questions that you're asking, is anybody out there who would like to just to comment on how they've managed to get 330-300 into their own work, or indeed if on the contrary they've tried and they've found there've been barriers or obstacles to getting a wider adoption, if they have anything they could share on that would be really interesting to hear any views. So is anybody keen just to share something on that, please? Feel free just to unmute yourself in case you're not visible on the screen to me if you put your hand up. And please don't be shy. Mr. Smith.
Hi, Mike.
Jim, please, yes, do chip in.
I've got some questions.
Okay.
I'll put them in the chat. So
yes, I saw that. Yes.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting doing here. Fascinating to see. I just want to be clear on the analysis of mostly looking at urban areas.
Jim, the sound's coming through quite.
Can you hear me now?
That's better. Thank you.
Yeah, I hadn't put my mic in the right position. Sorry. Apologies. So yeah, I'm Jim Smith. I work for Forestry Commission, as you know, Mike. Just really interesting to see this sort of evidence and this analysis going forward. But just a query is whether are we mostly looking at urban areas rather than rural, And also, does this this work taking account the National Forest Inventory and the trees outside woods data?
Yeah, both good questions. So the areas that are looked at in both the 330-300 analysis from the first part of the tour and then for the optimization, they're all urban. So that's based on the LSOAs and the rural urban classification. So we're just taking the ones that are urban. In terms of taking into account the NFI and trees outside woodlands data, so I'm aware of what specifically do you mean?
So you broke up a bit for me there.
Sorry, where did we hear up to?
Just the response to the second question.
NFI
sets.
So the NFI and trees outside woodlands data is used within the work, but I was just wondering, what do you mean by takes it into account?
It's just, when we're looking at the sort of the national government targets, the recording of those are based upon the NFI and the trees outside woodlands. So it's really good that we've got local targets being proposed, but it's really just think about how everything aligns.
Yeah, so the new targets, and in terms of the canopy area that I'm trying to create with that optimization work, that's based on the urban canopy that we know exists in those local authorities already, and that uses the NFI data and the TAO data to calculate that.
Cool. Okay, so ultimately all this stuff could actually result in quite big benefits for urban areas within the White Rose Forest area, and that will link into the delivery of the sort of the national targets and the regional targets, if you like, of increasing tree and woodland colour. Great, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. I think the biggest challenge we've got is the adoption of this approach, which is why I was asking that question in the first place, to see how people have actually what their experience has been of trying to get this approach adopted within their locality. And I think that's one that we haven't yet addressed. This is new research in the White Rose Forest, and we haven't yet addressed whether that can be achieved. But Paul Casey, I see you've got your hand up. So Paul, what is it you'd like to ask?
Hi, Mike. Hi
there.
I don't know if you can hear me all right.
Yes, fine.
Good. Yeah, Senior Orb Officer at Wakefield Council working in planning. So just on your question about the 330-300 and how we try to, I guess, bring that into the work that we do at Wakefield. We're just going through the process at the minute of having our design code kind of peer reviewed, out for public consultation, and hopefully formally adopted. So that will hopefully happen in the next few months. We went through some quite extensive kind of writing and consultation on the document. And at the consultation point, I looked at the 330-300 and asked if we could have that included within it as one of our kind of I guess kind of criteria for ensuring that we are including as many trees as possible on new development sites.
Yeah.
What we were told was that because it wasn't a formally adopted policy, we couldn't include it specifically. So what we looked at is how we then look at how we then increase tree numbers on site. So what we looked at was canopy cover percentages, and we tried to include it. Well, we have actually included it via that route. So what we've set is a minimum canopy cover target on the new development sites that we're looking at, and that will hopefully align us with the 330-300 on those sites and possibly on adjacent sites. So although not specifically included within the design code, there is a kind of a workaround, I guess, in terms of how we look at having minimum canopy cover on new development sites. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that in.
Yeah, Paul, I think that's a really interesting point, because I think two things really. First of all, just getting to the point where actually you've got a minimum canopy cover target within your development, it is a significant step forward, assuming what we're talking about is something around about the 30% target. I think ultimately, yes, what we would like to see is a wider adoption of an approach like this that actually landscape architects who are working for developers or it's developer led are actually assessing their developments and how they are placing the tree resource within the development, using this type of optimization modeling potentially, or something similar to it, because in that respect we are going to get the very best outcomes from new development. And if we don't get it right in new development, we're just creating, we're just falling even shorter and shorter of the targets that we all are aspiring to. So actually, I'd be really interested to know a little bit more of the detail of the policy, and we can maybe pick that up after the meeting at some point. I'll get in touch. But it also highlights the challenge when you're working within well, I'm particularly thinking here the planning sector and development plan sector, with this cycle of creating new policy, which is a real challenge, because actually if you're trying to create something new that actually isn't already within the development plan, then actually it's difficult to get that adopted. You might get guidance, but getting formal adoption is much more challenging. So actually what you're saying is, I think, is one of the highlights the difficulties that we experience in our day-to-day jobs and day-to-day lives in terms of trying to introduce really ambitious new ideas like this into practice that would, in anything like a sensible timescale. So yeah, much appreciate that comment from you, Paul. Anybody? Anything? Oh, sorry. The question here from Paul McCabe. Ellie, I don't know if you're able to answer this one. What Paul said in the chat, I noticed from the Woodland Trust Tree Equity Score that at least 2 urban LSOAs in York are 30% canopy cover or higher, while this study says 0. Is this because of the use of different data sets?
Yeah, so
yeah.
Kat has put an answer in the chat, which is really helpful. Thank you, Kat. But yeah, you're right. It's because of the use of different data sets. So the tree equity score from the Woodland Trust.
Sorry, I'm too slow. Yes.
Put uses a canopy product from Google. And when we look generally from that data set. Yeah.
I think we keep getting sort of, we're losing you slightly, Ellie, but that's fine. We got the answer that we needed there. So thanks very much, and thanks to Kat. Oh, yeah, thanks, Paul. Yes, you're welcome to chip in now.
Yeah, thanks. I thought I'd just chip in. There was a bit of silence. So I just in relation to point number 2 or question number 2 here. Yes, definitely. I'm sorry, everyone. I'm speaking from City of York. Work for City of York Council in the climate change team. Just recently done a lot of urban tree planting, and as Mike will know, and one of the big issues for us within the urban area was utility conflicts underground. Particularly, I really liked the presentation. I think this is all fantastic, and I'm really glad that you used York as a little case study there, as a little mapping study. It was really interesting to see that. Just from my knowledge of that particular area, that grid that you focused on, I think we probably looked at that for some tree planting a while ago, and it's just riddled with underground services. So I think you'd need to factor in minimum distances from underground cables, water mains, or whatever, sewers, whatever, drains, as part of this as well, which is very complicated. I'm sure that's going to be very complicated to do, because we've really had to rely on very detailed mapping from the utility companies to understand what's going on underground. But then again, they're not always, you know, that clear. Let's put it like that. And secondly, yeah, community residents. I think what we've experienced, where sometimes we've tried to plant in what seemed like a really obvious place to put a tree. You know, there's been some resistance from residents, whether they're parking on the verges, you know, there's historical verge parking, or we've planted in recently in some school grounds on the edge of school playing fields, and people then get very concerned about the views that they've enjoyed into those open areas, which can, you know, lead to complaints and things like that. So there's a lot of challenges, I would say, in the urban setting.
I think just there's a lot of points you raised there, Paul. One thing I want to mention, first of all, is it's 1:30 today. Oh, sorry, I think it's 2 o'clock today. TDAG are doing a webinar about the conflicts of tree planting and underground services and so on. I don't exactly know what the content of the webinar today will be about, but it's so broadly those subjects that they're interested in. I think something which I'd be really interested to know if you have any thoughts on. Another TDAG webinar recently, one of the projects or locations that was highlighted essentially as a sort of a best practice was Derwentthorpe, which is in York, which is designed as a new development. It's the Joseph Roundtree Housing Association or Housing Trust to the landowners, and the site was I suspect, although I don't know the details, but I suspect was master planned with optimizing green space and trees within it. And do you get a sense that actually in York there is any sort of appetite to sort of almost use that as a sort of look, this is what you can have, sort of exemplar, and this is what we aspire to, or do you think it's just a one-off? It was done in Derwentthorpe and it's not going to work anywhere else.
Sorry, is that a question for me, Mike?
Well, it was, yeah. It was just. I'd just be interested to know if you had any thoughts on that, Paul. Yeah.
I mean, I think that is, yeah, it's the aspiration. I mean, Derwentthorpe was a greenfield site, so it wasn't retrofitting trees into an existing urban environment, which sites like that are very few and far between within York. With it being such a constrained urban environment, such a small area overall, there's a lot of constraints on land use here. So that was as I said, a greenfield opportunity essentially, to do it right first time. But I guess what we're looking at to hit the sort of targets, even our canopy target of 13% is going to be very, very challenging, because it's largely going to be around retrofitting trees into the existing urban landscape, and then you run up against all these challenges that I've just listed. Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to think that people would see other locations and say, actually, well, yeah, but trees make such a difference in terms of the environment. Why wouldn't I want one in front of my house? You know, but I appreciate. I've dealt with situations in work before where car parking is sacrosanct, and if you can't park your car, then I'm afraid is very often it's almost like the bottom line. So I appreciate that often is a really key issue for people in terms of their residence, especially as you say in a constrained urban environment, which is the case in York. So thank you. Ellie, question from Deb Clark. Could the optimization model be applied against other urban areas, especially in the White Rose Forest, but I guess anywhere? But can we actually take the approach that's been done here and look at areas in Kirklees or Calderdale or whatever, and take a similar approach.
Yeah, so I've just turned my video off, so hopefully that'll help stop me breaking up.
Thank you.
So the model can be applied to other urban areas as long as the data is available. So I think really you need all the data sets, but I think the issue comes with the tree data. And we would have liked to look at more areas with the first bit of 330-300 work, but that came down to not having the tree data available. So yeah, it's really easy to, well, it's not really easy, but the model can be applied anywhere. Yeah, just depending if the data is available.
Right, thank you. Question, well, actually, Erin Wheeler from Wyker asked, and we appreciate that, yes, there are issues with using above ground planters in terms of tree survival and so on, but that's can be a management headache. But have we seen good examples of where good above ground planters could be used to sort of try and get over some of the conflict with utility issues? Is there any, I mean, I suspect in the simple terms, the answer to this question is yes, but is anybody on the call had really good success with the above ground planters for tree, to introduce tree into the local urban environment? And if you're not able to comment directly, maybe just put us something in the comments section, maybe just in response to Aaron. Sorry, carry on.
Sorry, Mike, if I may.
Ricky,
I think
yes.
The likelihood of getting a really good outcome with above ground planters just involves a level of infrastructure and finance that it just makes it prohibitively expensive. Not many local authorities can go down that front. Very, very few rare examples, few and far between, really. And I think you might struggle to actually find something that's workable for the majority, to be fair.
Do you think, Ricky, that if you got a community, a local, a street really interested in trying to do something within their streetscape, but very, very constrained, and the only option available to them was something of this nature, then actually it would still be worth trying to encourage a community to take on the responsibility themselves, adopt the maintenance and so on, or is it really just from a sort of almost like an arboreal cultural point of view, a bit of a no-no?
Yeah, I think we're not just talking about getting a few volunteers to throw a few litres of water at a tree every so often. Yeah. Fundamentally, we're talking about access to rooting volume, soil volume. Yeah. You can't do that with above ground planters unless you put that infrastructure in there. You link several planters together, or you could choose your tree species very carefully, but then you're choosing from a fairly limited planter. I'm not saying it can't work, but like I said, I think the opportunities for success are so limited that that not many examples exist to draw from for other local authorities going forward.
Thanks, Vicky. Thank you. Alan, sorry, Alan Simpson, you've your hand up. Alan, would you like to chip in, please?
Yeah, thanks. No, don't worry, there's a lot of discussion going on. It's not really a question. I think, as has been cropped up, really, there's increasingly being recognized, I think, now that trees, urban trees, street trees, but urban trees are no longer a cosmetic. They're a metaphysic. They're a first principle, because if we don't get that right, the future of our urban areas is not viable. And we can now prove this, as everybody knows. And unfortunately, it's not always the powers that be appreciate this. They sometimes still see it as a cosmetic. Oh, we're going to landscape this. You say, well, no, we've already got landscape, mate. But So there is an amazing amount of research at the moment in terms of species, in terms of what local communities like, and you'd be surprised the results of that sometimes. But I think one of the things we've got to bear in mind, and the economists certainly in London are getting a bit irritated now, and that is if you look at where most of the international investment goes, it goes into green cities. And most of those actually are in Europe, not actually in this country. And many towns and cities have in Europe have been doing really suds as well as street trees. I mean, in Munich, for example, for at least the last 10, 12 years. And again, you can't do a Harry Potter and just wave a wand and sort it. They've been putting a tree pit all the way down one side of a street, and all the services, cables and the rest of it down the other side. And many towns, again, are saying suds is critical. We've been very lucky in this country. We have so far avoided the 100 mil of rain in 1 hour. Copenhagen's had it, Eindhoven, various other places. It cost Copenhagen 5 billion kroner. Because effectively the city centre was, for at least a week, was out of commission. You couldn't do anything. And we've been a bit slow, I think, in this country in working on suds. But you can start working with that, with street trees. Okay, the Grey for Green in Sheffield, where we know is, I think, an excellent example. But we've all got to work out in our own towns and cities what it is we've actually got to do. And that means, as I say, that trees aren't just something to make places pretty. They are fundamental to making places actually survive in the future. Health, well-being, education. We all know the list, so I don't have to say all that. But we have got to persuade, and there are cost issues, I accept, the powers that be, that actually the urban forestry, for want of a better term, has got to move up the agenda, because otherwise our towns and cities are just not going to work. And like everything else, we know how long it takes for trees to actually grow and start doing and producing the benefits that we all know. As I'm sure lots of other folks have, working with developers, taking down healthy mature trees. Oh, we're going to plant 10 trees for everyone. No, sorry, we've still got a generation that are not going to benefit from those trees you've just taken down, mate. So they've got to stay. So I'll shut up. But I think it's interesting, the 330-300. When we went to America, they sort of said, oh, we're not metric. So we have to call it 330-330 because it's yards, not meters. But that's for another day. I'll shut up.
Thank you, Anne. Actually, I think it's very convenient that you can readily convert 300 meters into 330 yards. I think that's one of the blessings of our two systems. I think there's a couple of really interesting points there. I just wanted to come back on. I think the issue about replacing a mature tree with new trees is something that we've really badly failed to understand just what the consequences are, and you can't, as you say, just replace it with 3, 5, 10 new trees. You don't. The mass doesn't add up. Never mind anything else. It's interesting. Leeds are looking at a new planning policy. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, but they're looking at a new policy where they're looking to replace, if they are having to take out a mature tree, the replacement trees will have to meet the same carbon sequestration value at planting that the tree that was removed actually provided. So that's one way, I guess, of at least trying to deal with that particular issue in terms of tree replacements. terms of suds, I think, again, that's a hugely important point, because I was listening to a webinar last week where essentially it was admitted that actually our CSOs are overspilling. On average, every CSO is overspilling 30 times a year. So that's 30 incidents on average of pollution going into our watercourses, and since that's principally the places where they discharge. And trees are in of themselves a fantastic contribution to suds. And all these issues very much seem that what the problem is that we bunker our issues in terms of trees. We don't always see the big picture, actually the raft of benefits that they bring, but maybe trying to justify them on the back of their suds benefits, their carbon benefits, their heat reduction benefits. But it's the breadth of benefits that they bring that we really need to be able to articulate and get people to understand. It's just such a challenge to put a value on that. But that's me now, going off on a little rant. So I'll see what I can pick up in terms of other questions. If anything has come through. There's a very interesting one. Michelle Stevens, this just as a really interesting comment from her. In Huddersfield Town Centre, we moved the services as part of our new street scheme to allow for some tree planting. And we also had further constraints from underground cellars. In other streets, we have not had the space to move the services and overcome the ground cellars. Yeah, so that's, in a way, I suppose it slightly reflects a little bit what you were saying, Alan, about Munich, having the services on one side of the street. Often we do need to rationalise our services. We've so often just created as Paul McCabe mentioned, just a maze of these things, which are major constraints. But if there's a will, there can be a way found. I hope I haven't missed anything that anybody else has posted. Nobody else has got their hand up at the moment. If anybody would still like to chip in with any comments, please do.
Sorry, there was a couple of questions in the chat from James.
Go on, Ellie, if you can pick something up, because I've been, go on.
Yeah. So James has said.
Yes.
A couple of questions. Does the optimization model account for deprivation as a variable? And second one, how could work be practically applied to improve access to green space in deprived neighbourhoods? So I'll kind of answer the second one first. So the 330-300 doesn't take deprivation into account as part of that metric. It's just really looking at access. And in terms of improving access to green space, obviously in the optimization model I've showed, I was focusing on trees and putting those trees in rather than creating new areas of green space or improving access to them. So I think the maps that I showed, so the one I showed of York with the different grading and the colours showing which areas are performing well and which areas are performing worse, that could be used alongside deprivation data to identify where the most deprived areas are and where are the areas in particular that are performing worst at 330-300, and kind of focus on that for improving access to green space first. But the work really just identifies where there's a need for it, rather than ways of improving it. And then does the optimization model account for deprivation as a variable? Again, it doesn't, just because of what 330-300 is. But I think using the results again alongside that deprivation data and identifying those areas where you could plant those trees first would be a way to kind of take that into account.
Yeah, so you carry out the optimization mapping, but then you can introduce other filters after that to prioritize as you may feel is appropriate. So yeah, I think that's an appropriate way to go about things. I I realise there are people starting to have to leave now. So thank you very much for those who've sent messages. It seems like probably a good place to call it a day. Give everybody 15 minutes to get their lunch before they have to get back to their desks. And in which case, if there aren't any more hands up or comments, I'll just thank Ellie very much for the work that she's done, the contribution she's made to this discussion, and obviously for the time today. And hope that we'll have some really interesting discussions going forward. And thank you very much for the comments made in the chat as well. That's been really helpful. That's really helped to keep the thought process moving as we've gone through the webinar. So thanks very much to everybody, and keep up the good work. Cheerio, Ellie.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Yeah, and just please think of Ellie's comments, questions, and if you have any time, do feedback on those more. Sorry about that, Ellie.
Okay.
Okay.